clipped everything.
Okay, this is Philosophy of Music podcast. We're in the black box at Eastwind Academy. We have Adhiraj and Barun. They've been teachers of music since. Adhiraj's been teaching for how long, Adhiraj?
It's been a bit.
It's been
3
a bit.
months, 4 months.
What about you? A couple of days?
Even like half his time at least, if not quarter.
Yeah, maybe a couple of weeks or so.
So yeah, I've had these two as my teachers for a while, and now I'm sitting down with them discussing philosophy of music.
How
as
long have you
musicians.
been learning music for?
How long I've been learning music for? Well, I started in 9th grade and now I'm in 5th year, so do the math.
No.
Wow.
5th year, I mean,
Yeah.
it looks like
Five-
you've gone backwards to me.
Yeah.
but-
9 years, 9 years.
9 years.
About
So-
8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years. Okay.
But I've been actually coming to a music school since 4 years.
So-
Before that, I just learned the guitar myself.
So, I mean, mathematically then, by your own logic, he's probably been teaching for 4 years, so
Okay.
I would think. He's been teaching you music?
Yeah, he's been teaching me the bass and musicality. Yeah, so he's taught me musicality.
As like the bass to play music on, or for any other reason?
Bass to play music on, definitely.
And so, what is music to you?
What is music to me? Yeah, that's a nice segue Adhiraj just found to this topic. I'm gonna ask that you first, then we can come on me. So what is music to you, Adhiraj?
What he's talking about, man. I was just talking to someone yesterday that it's very difficult to talk about music.
He's not wrong.
You're not wrong, but what is music to you? If you were to talk about it.
Read above. No, it's difficult because what is it to me? It's actually even more difficult because it's now become so interwoven with your identity. People either think of you as a musician, which you're not necessarily one, or I don't know. It's really difficult because there's so many parts to it. You look at it as so many different things. There are skills associated with it. There are skills that you have, the things that you don't have. There's stuff that you like. Some things that are non-skill based, skill based, but are totally vicarious. And then there's of course the definitions and the philosophy and that stuff. So honestly, it's a big mess. That's what it is. That's what.
You want to try and time to that? What is music to you?
That's actually pretty apt. He took all the words away. Now whatever I say will be overcompensating.
Okay, let me ask you an easier question maybe.
Do you want this to be a serious interview, or are we okay just
do
This is
whatever
fine,
you
right?
want. Cuss all you want, man. So how often do you end up listening to some sort of music video say that this isn't music? Like my dad would listen to rap music and like, ye music nahi hota. And this is not music at all. How often do you find yourself in that spot? At least you tell yourself that this isn't music.
Almost never.
Almost never, ever since childhood?
Now that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I
Memory
mean,
of
since
that
you've
is-
been coherent.
But the thing is, it erases itself from your memory because you're trained not to say it beyond a point, especially in where we are now. We work with a lot of people who come to us with stuff that they consider to be musical, right? You have to suspend your judgment in certain situations, in certain circumstances, because there are dangers of discouraging someone, and you could actually be discouraging someone by discouraging their music, or by downwriting or downgrading what it is that they listen to. So in that sense, I think there's a certain merit in being a little more Catholic in the way in which you look at music. Broad.
Okay.
That's where the term comes. That's what it means actually. It's not. I don't mean religious. God forbid. But yeah, to be a little more broad in the whole in the way. So you don't reject really.
Yeah.
You just say that this is music that I don't like, but you'd still use the term music. respectfully.
So
Yeah.
in your memory, how you don't have a single oh, that okay, this isn't music, where you said it to yourself or someone.
I would maybe say it of a particular performance. If you see a guy barfing into a microphone, uh, you know, while sort of dragging his amp along the stage with him, that kind of, I mean, so this doesn't look very musical or artistic. But otherwise, not too. And the other thing is, then the stuff that you don't like to listen to, you also generally stay away from.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really encounter situations when people come and foist. It's not like college, where some guy is tripping on something and come, hey man, have you heard this? And you're like, what the fuck is this, man? So that kind of exposure doesn't really happen much nowadays.
I think on the other hand, we do get that exposure because we have students who are just like, hey, this is my vibe. We recently have a student who comes and he says he likes particular type of music, but when he plays his music, you can see it's more electronic and it's more thing. So we do. It's like students do like that. So you do get introduced to that. That may not be your vibe, and so you may be like, hey, that's not really. They're not really doing any musical stuff. I mean, they still are, but like, your vibe, you're not into that, right?
It's like, yeah, I think that you introduced me to a band many years ago. I think it was a Death Cab.
I did not.
Or but there was some band that I'd never heard of and that you listen to and that you like, that you introduced me to, and I was skeptical. I wasn't dismissive, but I was skeptical initially. I gave it half a chance. I can't remember the name of the band though. If you could just name a couple of the bands that you like.
Man, a few years ago, I was just listening to RHCP.
No. It was after RHCP. It was something else. You come across a couple of bands.
Tame Impala.
That's the one. Yeah. That's the one. And so I was skeptical as to saying, okay, where's this going to go? But it was a really, really interesting experience for me.
Great music, Tame Impala.
Yeah.
I mean, again, people would differ.
People will
Right?
definitely differ.
Because like they're great. It's a trip, as you would call it. But people don't. If you actually if you study it, nothing's really happening in it,
Yeah.
right?
It's
And
not academically.
right. So if you showed it to somebody who considers himself really trained, he might just be like,
This
this is like not really
Yeah.
music because it's not really happening.
You poked into definition of music.
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
Oops.
How would you define music as best as you could?
Wow. What kind of answer are you looking for?
Yeah, like dictionary type one.
You
Go
want, like,
anywhere.
academic?
Go both ways. Go academic. Go a little informal, dictionary wise.
No, I'll tell you what. Your answer to my next question will decide this. Did you put these lights up yourself?
No.
Okay. We'll go for the dictionary definition. Well, look, it's an art form. Okay, it's a collection of sounds. That could be subjectively pleasing to somebody, and it could be an indulgence that someone spends a lot of time on as a hobby or a profession.
What about you? How would you define music?
Again, like a textbook definition.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Wow.
If a person just stops you on the street and
I
asks,
mean,
"What is music?"
you've got your scientific explanation. You've got when sounds are produced through vibrations and they
I
come
know that,
together
yeah.
and then they makes a sound pleasant to the ear. Then it becomes music. If it's unpleasant to the ear, it becomes noise. That's what you hear in your textbook, environment textbook.
And a lot of American universities.
Yeah. If you want to know how I teach it to my students, I basically I ask them, what do you think is music, and they give me the same thing that I just gave you, and then I basically say music is basically melody, rhythm, and harmony, and they're like, whoa, what is all this three? And then we take off.
So melody, rhythm, and harmony.
Yeah.
Those are the three essential things to music.
Sure. I mean, they could probably be broken down even further, but this is the definition I use to pique my students' interests.
So is this definition somewhat of a thing that we I've been learning music from Barun for a long while, and every few lessons I realized that whatever he's been teaching me, he wanted me to unlearn it and learn something else. So major scales and then modes. Modes are to break the major scale. You taught me. So is that definition a box which is meant to be broken out of? Is that how you?
I mean, okay. You know, there's a saying that rules are meant to be broken, right? Applies on everything. But to break a rule, you must know the rule.
Yeah.
Same thing.
That's a really, really important point. Just going back a bit, I would add actually one more thing, maybe that to the rhythm melody. I mean, there are lots of elements of music, but I would add an important component to that would be emotion and dynamic. Would probably be up in the first list, and then lots more in the second list, right? But this thing about breaking rules, I think that this is where it gets really dangerous, because every now and then you will get and you come across guys who put out some work, and they say that we're breaking rules and we're trying to break boundaries and we're getting experimental and stuff like that, and you scratch beneath the surface, and they're not familiar with the rules. I'm not being puritanical, that's not the point, because at any given point, I mean, there are loads of rules that I'm not familiar with, or that I cannot recall at that present moment. But I think it stems from a thing of you have a reason to be doing what you're doing and saying what you're saying, and that reason is not that this is the only way I know how to do it. And that is the case with a lot of people, that this is the only thing that they know how to do, and the only way that they know how to play. So that can become a little, it can become a little dangerous, a little dicey. So it also it comes from a space where the music that I listen to is, let's say, one chord, one groove, all the way through, and so my assumption is that okay, that's the thing. So that's the music I'm going to make as well. But little do I know that the guy who's doing that stuff has been around the world and back in terms of where his head is. He understands sound, understands emotion, and then has arrived at that one chord, that one groove, that one sound, given it to this man who loves it so much and doesn't know what to do with it. So there is that. I think.
Taking that further, how many rules can you actually break?
All of them.
You could break all of them.
Yeah.
So
You've been to school, right?
I have.
Yeah.
This is a school, by the way, and he's the headmaster or something.
No.
No, that would be Akhil.
That's Akhil. Yeah.
He's something of the other. Can silence be music?
Yeah.
Of course, it is.
It's frequently music. I mean, like if there was silence now, it'd be musical.
But if a compositional piece consists just of silence, would you put that in the realm of music?
Depends on what happens before the silence and after. If there's
Context.
silence before,
I'll give you context for the
if there's
question.
silence before and silence after, the door. In fact, there's a little street
It's
noise
not-
that's irritating me.
Yeah.
It's not shut properly.
Thank you.
So if there's, I know you've got this favorite man of yours.
Mhm. Mr. John Cage.
Yeah. So.
For context to the listeners, Mr. John Cage has a piece of art, at least if not music, in which he just has 3 movements, and he would indicate those movements just by literally any movement. Sometimes you just shut and put his piano back on and just shut the thing to his piano 3 times in 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and apart from that there is total silence, and he calls it a compositional piece. So would you consider that a musical song or a piece or something?
I think it depends on how really experimental you want to get, and there are these experiments. He's experimenting with sound and trying to see what will happen if he doesn't play if he doesn't actually play 3 pieces, right? But like Adhiraj said before, its context is needed, because if you think about rhythm in its basic form, rhythm, it tells you when to play and when not to play, right? And if you're telling you when not to play, that means that place is empty. That means there's silence there, right? So the kind of see the silence is important as long as you have context, I guess.
See, the thing is, if I'm sitting next to Mr. John Cage at the ambassador's house in Austria and he's explaining this to me, I'd nod my head in agreement, you know. See, yeah.
But would you agree with that? Really?
I don't really know, and I don't care, honestly. And I'm again not being facetious. I actually don't care, in the sense that that's really an argument as to a question of what constitutes art or not. It could be music, it could not be. You haven't made a sound, is what I'd say. And then he'd ask, but do you think it's musical? And I'd say, you haven't made a sound. And then he'd say, yeah, but do you think it's musical? And I'd just say that you haven't made a sound. And we just carry on this parallel conversation. So I really honestly couldn't care. It's great. I think it's a fabulous idea artistically. But
I think I'll pick up on that. Say you went to a museum, and you art gallery, in fact, and you are watching some art pieces that have been hung on the wall, and you get to one piece which is one red line across a white canvas. Is just one red line, or is just somebody has maybe splashed some color on the canvas and put it up and saying in modern art. Now, are you going to consider that art even if it's obvious that he just dropped like a blob of red paint?
I have a liberal mindset on that. I would say yes, but again, I would draw you a parallel from John Cage. John Cage was a renowned composer by the time he came up with the idea of 433. So, to me, I guess he knew all the rules, he had broken all the rules, and he was bored of that as well. And he maybe just sat in silence and he was like, yeah, even this, to me at least, is little musical. So to that painter, looking at even if it's not a white stripe or just a stripe in the entire canvas, even if it's just a shade of white, if an artist can look at it that way, and to me, I guess that is how I would define music, that if you can actually romanticize a sound enough in your head, then that sound is music to you.
The whispers of my lover in my ear.
So what you said earlier...
We good?
Yeah? What you said earlier, that he knows the rule breaking because he's bored. If you really want to find like an example of that, then you should go listen to some Jacob Collier. Collier, or whatever, however you pronounce it, sorry. Right? This guy is basically like, I know all the rules. Now screw this basic making of stuff and I'm just going to do whatever. That break all the rules but make sense.
And another way why the ambient noise can be music is because one of my friends was just playing something and he wanted to record it, and between the pauses of his two notes a bus went by, and that the sound of the bus going by perfectly fit within that gap. And now to that bus driver, obviously he doesn't give a fuck that somebody's recording it, but it fit perfectly there.
Yeah, just like that horn.
Just like that horn. It just fit perfectly there and it turned into a part of music.
Yeah.
So isn't it just to some extent personal? To the most extent.
How does the sound relate to be personal?
That I liked it.
Okay. Fine. I don't know about personal, but if you go to many tracks over the years, you will find many producers, they use these sounds as ambient noises, a bus passing by, a plane passing by, crickets just chirping in the back, rain, stuff like that. Any noise that's in the sound that is there in the ambience, and he has taken it up and he just used it to fill his ambience, becomes part of the song. Those are ambient sounds. That's why they call ambient.
Okay, and if you take out the subjectivity out of it, and if you look at music mathematically and scientifically, so Pythagoreans actually studied music to study math. How interrelated can that go? How deep does that go?
So you've done some research since the last time we... That's nice.
Surprised.
It's, you know, at least with, now here's the thing, is that with the theory of music, actually I'd go so far as to change it to say the theory of the knowledge of music, the TOK of music, right? It runs, that linkage runs really, really deep, because Western music has totally adopted that system, you know? And just like we've adopted a system of measurement that comes from the movement of the sun across the earth, and so on and so forth, right? Similarly, with regard to how we divide up our notes, you know, has been well, it's been standardized, and it's been standardized courtesy of these guys who were hovering about in tunics a few thousand years ago. So we've adopted that, as we have with a lot of their mathematical systems as well. It has constraints, right? Because it gives you where it gives you a very measurable set of things to play with. Those are rules, and those are rules, to my opinion, worth breaking.
The mathematical ones?
Yeah.
Could you give me an example?
I'll actually pick up here. From
Yeah,
Adhiraj.
do that. Yeah.
Before I help you with the example and stuff, I'm gonna. Math is considered the most basic of all sciences. Everything in the world is built upon math. Why? Because math helps us put everything into order, put the unordered, which is the nature, into order, and that includes music, in fact, right? Because ultimately music sound originally is just part of nature, which we've used math to make into certain number of sounds that make all the notes that we have in the Western system, and they've got it down to these 12 equidistant notes or some shit like that, right? Which is our basic 12 tet system, as we call it in Western music.
What is tet?
I don't know the full form really. Maybe
Okay,
Adhiraj knows.
I don't know the full form of it.
It's a system. I have to remember what the full form was, but basically it says that we have 12 musical notes which are at these frequencies, and they go over and over again. Another example that of breaking the rule is, nowadays a lot of people, even earlier, but nowadays there are more people who are breaking this 12 tet system and looking at frequencies between each of these 12 notes, and so you're getting like 36 tet system, which is 3 into 12, right? So we're getting a few frequencies above or below those certain set frequencies. So now you're breaking the rules of math that were given for us musicians, supposedly by whoever made it, right? And breaking the rules, that's an example. And they sound pretty cool, in fact. They sound like a really intense harmony.
So essentially if you compare, like you said, the 12 tet system and the major scale, more it's what I would like to talk about. The major scale in the West, do re mi fa sol la ti do, is exactly the same of what we came up in the East, which is sa re ga ma pa dha ni sa. Same relative gap between two notes. So essentially it's a sort of a equation which we perceived, or like we being the musicians of that time, they perceived it through their ears. So essentially, is all music a bunch of equations we perceive and we like it somehow?
I think I mentioned this right at the beginning of my previous comment, that these equations are basically help us bring order to the unordered, right? They could have heard a lot more things we don't know because we weren't there, but they were like, it's too much, I can't handle it, or whatever, and they would have brought it down to these things that are the obvious ones, to make it easier for them to understand, or others to understand, or easier for them to share or to use, whatever.
Yeah, but that's why they made the rules. But what I'm saying
Always.
is, can you, in finality, break down any piece of music and say that, okay, this is a mathematical equation which begins from this note, goes like this, and in the end it ends like this. So the idea how it comes to me is that in a major scale, if the frequency of the first note is x, then the octave with the frequency would be 2x. The fifth would be x plus half of x. The third would be x plus a quarter and an x. and the seventh would be x plus 3/4 x. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
So essentially, you see an equation going on there. You increase it by this
It's a
much, and you
pattern,
increase it
yeah.
by
Yeah.
and that same pattern was caught up in the West and in the East. So by the instrument of measurement we have.
No. That's not by the instrument. I think that's the point that he's trying to make as well, is that this was, it was more a question of saying, how is it that we can bring order to or understand in language that a million people can understand, right? Something that's happening around us. We have to be aware of two things, that even with music over here, the sargam system, saregama, right, is one system. Okay, it's definitely not the oldest system. It's just like, Hindi itself as a language, right, was only put together late 1800s. Before that it didn't really exist as a unified language. I don't know when exactly the sargam system itself per se came to India, but it's one of many musical systems that people have to sing. What is a lot more common across the world is actually the pentatonic system, and that has little to do with 12 notes. It's actually got more to do with 5 notes, and it doesn't matter where those 5 notes are, whether they're within or without an octave. There's absolutely no, it really doesn't matter, because they're based on what you're hearing. So if you're hearing a bird chirping or chirping at some point or the other, that's your do, that's where you take off from. So I think that there is some merit in saying that, okay, that no matter which language you're speaking in, you're still dealing with the same 12 frequencies, let's say, right? But at the same time, we have to be a little careful about this, because this is where I think perspective becomes really important, is that we are talking about a group of people who imposed the Olympics on us, which is great, right? We are also talking about a group of people who believed in eugenics. And eugenics was the controlled breeding of species. We are also talking about a group of people who were striving for a perfect society and were willing to go to great lengths in order to achieve that perfect society. We're inheriting a lot of literature from those folks. Maybe we haven't inherited a lot of literature from Nalanda because it was burnt down. Maybe we haven't inherited a lot of literature from the Chinese texts because the Chinese Shaolin temple was burnt down at some point or the other. Tibet is in the mess that it is in right now, fairly ancient cultures. There were massive migrations and extremely political human migrations. I'm bringing these up because they're very important, significant movements, right? And that's, every time there's a movement of a wave of people, and there's a movement of trade, then there's a movement of information, which would go both ways as well. Some cultures were good at documentation and measurement separately. We as a nation or as a people, or our ancestors here, also stared at the moon and also looked at the planets and so on and so forth, and came up with a different set of conclusions in a different language, which those guys didn't understand. We don't know what's happened between then and now to adopt one or the other, and to say that one enters the classroom and one does not, right? For me, I think more importantly, when you say what is music, right, I think personally that is something that is probably worth a lot more dwelling on, because you need to, if you want to do things differently, if you want to break rules, you have to ask yourself, am I brushing my teeth every morning because it's a fact that I'm going to get cavities if I don't? How do I know that? Because my dentist told me. How does he know that? Does he know that because he's tried it? No, there's no proof of that, right? Someone said it, and so now at 6 o'clock in the morning, half the world is brushing its teeth. Are we in a position to look at life differently and say that maybe that's not the best way to go about things? Maybe there's another way of going about things. See, that is a problem. Okay, and that's a problem that has allowed us to be governed. It's allowed us to be democratized. It's allowed the Gutenberg press, or whatever, that Bible, the printer, to it's allowed the democratization of Christianity with the controls of it still being left in the papal vestiges, right? So it's, for me, it's a big deal. All of this stuff is a big deal. It's not conspiracy theory stuff, but I think it is a question of being in a situation where if you were the one to make the rules, who would be listening to you?
I'm gonna a lot of his points, they made. I'm gonna just talk about those and relate it back to a point that you made earlier in one of your questions. But basically, when people move around, a lot of things get moved around, right? And ideas get exchanged, and war happens. Ideas get removed, right? So who knows how much we've lost in all these years of war, right? So you made a point earlier where you said that there they have this do re mi fa, and here we have sa re ga ma, and that's what we all heard. So that's what it's become standardized. But like he said, that could have just been adopted when they came and took over us, right? So we've adopted that because they gave us that, right? But if you look at it, the past before that, none of the music from here, from anywhere in Asia, in fact, resembles anything with the system. You have tunings that are changeable on the spot. You have frets that move, so you don't have a fixed frequency. You're just like, my C is here, but my D can be slightly sharper than what it should be in your do re mi fa. So we didn't hear it like those 12 notes. We didn't, right? Our historical instruments tell us that we didn't. The historical instruments from Turkey, from the Middle East, from Japan, from China, they tell us that no, they didn't hear those 12. In fact, I got a chura recently. I showed it to you, in fact. Remember? And we tried moving the frets. I was too scared to do it myself because I was like, what's going to happen? Because we've been trained now, like he said, we've been trained to adopt this system of it needs to be at these intervals, right? So, I mean, your point is kind of invalid there, right? That we didn't really hear it like that.
Okay, fair enough.
We
That's
don't
the
know
system
that
we have.
right?
Yeah,
So
we
it
don't.
is very, very tricky. And I'd like to now go back to that thing, if you don't mind, about talking a little more about the pentatonic becomes interesting. Again, it's a name, and I hate myself for just using that name, and but it's interesting because that somehow or the other seems to be quite pervasive. Funnily enough, you take, let's say, a culture like the Mongols. They've been secluded. Okay, they came, right? They conquered, and then they went back. And then when they went back, they never came out again. And what happened to them after they went back was ridiculous. Every mention of them was removed from the Europeans because the Europeans didn't want to mention that a horde of Mongols came and destroyed them. So they were, I don't know what the word would be, but I mean, basically their memory was not really preserved, and definitely not in good fashion. There were stories being told to children about how cruel these people were, etc. They adopted some methods in warfare, but everyone does. But other than that, everything about them and their culture totally obliterated, to the point where their greatest leader was buried, and the area around the sacred hill on which he was buried was made a nuclear waste site so that no one could access it until very, very recently. These people have a form of music as well, and it's very, very interesting. It's rhythmically extremely accessible. It's the blues, like whack, bam, the blues. The instruments are beautiful. They've got a couple of things. It could be similar to. There's a drum that's very, very similar to a djembe. It's like a large djembe. There's something that's even larger that's similar to a large timpani, and it's similar to a Rajasthani instrument that we have here. And funny because both those cultures are nomadic cultures, right? Why they would want to be carrying such a large drum on their backs is anybody's question, but they said, yeah, we'll do it.
But they probably didn't carry it on their backs, right? They wanted to
They
carry it on
carried
animal.
on horse cart or whatever
Yeah.
it is, just like they
Maybe
carried
even
their
just
entire
like camels.
utes. They carried their utes and their tents with them. And then they had the singing thing. Now, they are one of the few cultures in the world that sing the way they do. And they can sing in two voices at the same time. And one voice is stable and the other voice is changing, right? Now, that's actually not inaccessible. In my more adventurous moments, I've tried it. And there have been times when it actually works. It's not a big deal. It expands my technical range. Technically, I can go down to a D or a C sometimes, as per whatever thing is. But when I do this, I'm going into some other zone where it's deeper than I can hear. My question is now, what's going on here? Who's not talking about this? Why? What's the problem? Is it too difficult for Andrew to learn, or for John Cage to learn and document and write about, and then come back and put into a Trinity exam workbook? That's important, because that is the politics which decides what music we learn.
The world learns, because they are giving the world that information. Why must he spend his 12 minutes now, 13 minutes with 3 acts of silence where he could figure out what these guys do with their throat singing and their throat chanting, and because it sounds amazing. I just recently heard a Mongolian metal band.
It's ridiculous.
And it was mind-blowing, the things they do.
Like this metal band, when these guys drone, they're droning from here. They're not droning from a bass guitar.
Yeah.
And man, it's crazy. It's just
Name of the band?
I don't remember the name of the band.
They're difficult to pronounce.
I do.
It's a Gyun.
Oh, we'll figure it out and put it down.
Gyuntu or something like that.
So how often have you guys thought about what is music? Has it ever occurred, I'm sure it occurred to you to think about what I'm doing, I'm a musician, so what is it? Or do you remember what made you think about the abstract definition of it?
But honestly, I have never thought about it unless someone asks me a question. But I do not think about it. I think about a lot of stuff. I wake up in the morning and I wonder about lots of things, major things. But I have never thought about this one, really.
Yeah, I don't really think about what is music and what it is for me and all that. I just accept what it has made me, or what I make of it, I guess, if that makes sense.
But you have asked these questions to your students. You just...
In a academic sense, yeah. I want them to figure out and...
Yeah.
Have you ever gotten any interesting answers you weren't expecting? Or is it the usual?
I wouldn't... Yeah.
Broadly, it's generally the same.
Generally the usual. I would say I hear funny things. I have exercises where we listen to, let's say, chords or sounds of chords or sounds of harmonies of different notes, and we try to put like an image to it, or try to put like a memory to it or a feeling to it. And so I've heard a lot of crazy stuff in that. For example, when I played this chord called the major seventh, which for everyone is like a very it's a chord. It's theory and all that crap, doesn't really matter. But most of the people, they listen to it and they're like, it's nice, it's calming, it's mellow, it makes you think about, it makes you slightly nostalgic. But this one guy was like, it makes me think of this room which is full of blood and there's murders just happened and I'm standing there holding the knife and drenched and my hand is dripping, and I was just like, that's pretty intense. How you got that, I do not know, but it's really cool to see it from you, right? And now if I heard it, I would be like, cool, because I've heard it before, and now I can through him I can perceive that, which is pretty, like those kind of different things I hear. But I've never really, when I say what is music, then I don't really, then I hear the general answers,
like
music sound is playing, clapping is liking it is music, stuff like that, I'm not, that's just being slightly joking about it, but
okay. That was a fairly interesting episode. Adhiraj knew my questions and he has altered his answers.
No, not really. It really depends on how I'm feeling at this present. But you said that you're going to answer the question for us once,
What music is to me?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
I don't know. Is that the question?
What is your first question?
That's what I asked. What is music to you?
What is music?
So to me, music is any sound I can romanticize. That is music to me.
What do you mean by romanticize?
To which I'm not indifferent to, I guess. That would not be a good answer, no. There could be a sound I'm very not indifferent to and still not romanticize it. But to romanticize it, I would believe I would connect some sentiment to it.
You
Any
spend a
sound.
lot of time resolving disputes with yourself.
I don't know what you mean by that, man.
You'll understand
No.
once you listen back to the recording. You'll get it.
You're like, I said this and I said this. What?
Okay. So okay, I have a couple of questions. I mean, a couple of things, right? Is that you did say that we're discussing the philosophy of music. I'm not too sure as to whether we've done that. Yeah. So
Yeah, I don't know. I think we just given our opinions and just talked about
yeah,
what we think.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what I want right now. Musician's philosophy, I guess.
You're a musician, man. Are you a musician?
I mean, who knows?
Huh? Who knows? I'm not a musician.
They're both musicians. They earn like.
No. But you see,
outfit.
okay, but here's the thing, Tanmay, for us, right? For me, I don't feel like I'm a musician. There are times when I feel probably as inadequate as a lot of my students, a lot of other people I work with might be feeling, and I don't look at myself as being a musician. Sometimes I hate the term, I hate the word, I hate the name or anything about it. Because there is an aspect of it is that you do get at some point caught up in identity, and if you're someone like myself, that identity situation could easily become an identity crisis as well, because you just blow things out of proportion in your head. But it does become it reaches a point where you wonder as to whether what you do defines who you are, and then you do what you do because of who you are, right? I think that there are loads of other aspects about what are the compelling reasons for me to get into music, which actually don't have to do with an active philosophical decision that says that I want to be a musician. I think some of it is a lot more passive. Some of it is a lot more driven from a place which I'm not entirely in control of, and that is why I don't want to ask the question. That's why I don't want to go there.
So you avoid the question in a way?
No, it's just that I think it's hidden so deep inside that it's beyond me, it's beyond my awareness.
Let me actually throw this at you. Before I have a point to make with his point, but I'll throw this at you. What is a musician?
I was gonna ask that. What
Who
is a musician?
What is a musician? Who is a musician?
I would define a musician if others recognize you as a musician, then I believe you're a musician.
That's just recognition. That's just term somebody's given you. What is a musician? That's
Jesus
the
Christ died by that rule, my friend.
Uh-huh.
You know.
So anyway, pick up his point. I would say the only time I would call myself a musician is when like you get all these people saying, "What do you, beta, kya karte ho?" I mean, like they come and ask you, "What do you do in life?" And then you have to sum everything that you do, and you have to tell them so that they would understand. So then you say, "I am a musician," and they judge you for it straight away. But that's a different matter. But like it's a term you use, I guess, on people who wouldn't understand what all it involves, but maybe to help communicate some idea of what it can do or what it holds, right?
Yeah.
Like for people like, especially people who are in the previous generations, right? The more older in the generation you go, the lesser they understand the broad spectrum of things.
The abstractness.
Somebody who is involved with music can do. So for them, the more you explain it, the more confused they're gonna get also, right? You say I'm a musician, they're like, he plays music. That's it. That's all they need to know.
How would you define a musician, Adhiraj?
Someone who plays music, or plays a musical instrument rather. So that's where I would have a problem, in the sense that, then
How much
the
playing do you
Piper
need
of
to know?
Hamelin comes to mind, or the Three Musicians of Bremen, or whatever preachers they are.
Anybody in the
Some-
world who plays an
yeah.
instrument is now a musician.
But but I mean, just because I'm a snob, I don't necessarily want to be associating myself just by term with the guy who's busking at the street corner, in a man bun and slippers and playing a gong drum, something like that, right? Because he's Australian.
You've just alienated all the audience with man buns.
Stereotype
Fair
101.
enough. Um, I have no apologies to offer there. But I mean, for some reason, those guys do something. They wear man buns, then they wear kurtas, and then they wear pajamas. It's just a thing. I don't know why, right? But in any case, because for me, it's not just that, and in fact, that's probably the least of it. I find the prospect of playing an instrument, of playing music, sometimes to be extremely daunting. Sometimes I don't like it. These guys know that. I've been very lucky to have a very bunch of supportive, supportive musicians to play with and work with, right? But it's. I mean, definitely the performance of it or something is not always. It is not always what it's about. I could as much be a teacher or a squash coach or something or the other as I am a musician, vocationally, I guess, in that sense. So I don't really know.
I feel like if you call us musicians, you're saying that you're restricting what we do, right? Right. Like I said, we are teachers also. Technically, we are just teachers, right? At the core of it all, and then we're just musicians because we can play instruments also. So we're teachers who are musicians.
But you're a
who are
teacher
this,
because
who
you
are
learn
that.
music.
No, I'm
You would be teaching
I'm
something
teaching
else,
music because I know it well,
Okay.
right? I don't have to be a musician to know it well. But again, if you're like you said, if you're a snob, then you'd be like, no, it doesn't work like that. You have to know it really well to be a musician, right? Ultimately, like you asked him what's a musician, and he said what?
He just gave a very
He said anybody who can play instrument,
anybody
right?
who can play an instrument.
So you don't need to have knowledge to play instrument. It's pretty easy to play any instrument in the world.
But that begs the question. You both have had students who have started from ground up. As teachers, when do you feel that now the student is sort of he's entered into the mind realm of a musician?
I don't. That's never a benchmark for me.
Yeah.
I never even think of it.
As not as a benchmark, but it's just as a intuition. Now you feel that as
No, there are three very, very separate things. The one benchmark is when is there a reasonable amount of dexterity with the instrument to the point where someone can teach themselves. That is really, really important. That independence is important. Second,
Sorry, I just want to interrupt. I think you might be using the word dexterity wrong there. I think you should use the word proficient. When you feel like they're proficient enough to be able to put themselves on it, because dexterity just gives you like, okay, I can maneuver around the instrument. Right? Proficiency means you understand the instrument to a certain degree to be able to. No.
It would be dexterity.
Okay.
Because then the other thing would be this is where the proficiency would come in. Is that are they able to then utilize the instrument to express themselves, not just to play anything, but to express themselves, whatever it is that they say, right? Now, that the journey from there on is fraught with difficulty, right? It's it's the equivalent of a caterpillar walking across a forest in the hope that it's not going to get.
But then
knocked
you
out
believe
before
that
it.
that's where that journey begins. When you can actually say something with your instrument, say like at least express yourself.
That's where a different journey begins, right? Before that is a journey to be able to get with the instrument, right?
That's one part. The other one is the more difficult one, the expressing, because so you can express yourself on your instrument if you know that you need to express yourself, but getting to that point is a very difficult point. And we know it, all of us know it, we've all been in situations where you've had your parent shouting down your throat, or you've had a teacher shouting down your throat, and you want to say something back and you're quivering with rage or fear or something or the other, and all you can do is gulp. It's you having to cross that in your head every time you feel that you want to say something. So now for me that's where the story is, and that's where the game is, right? And it's really interesting because it doesn't become about how good or bad I can play, you know. There are times when I you know, I see a student and I see them struggle, and all I'm thinking of is the words that I heard when someone else saw me struggle. And a lot of times they were words of encouragement. And that is what gave me, you know, the strength or the perseverance to just take an additional step. And you know, increase my proficiency, or increase my dexterity, or keep at something, not cast something away, things like that. There were times when at the same time, I sang a note wrong. I remember getting slapped 20 times, and you know, one after the other, it's just tuck 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 like that. I either sang a note wrong, or you know, I forgot a lyric or something like that. So there were those as well. So the decisions for me were then, you know, which of these do you choose to pass on? Which of these do you choose to sort of keep off the table? Because only then are you really dealing with expression. Only then are you dealing with someone saying, I have an instrument, but if I can't say what I want to say, then I can't express myself on it. And then if I can say what I want to say, how do I express myself on it? And then the world opens up for you, and it becomes very beautiful. It becomes nice. Whatever that means, whatever that picture is for you, that's what music is for me.
I don't know if you'd agree or not, but I believe if I have to make a line that a person is a musician, I think that would be it.
I don't know.
Can you really say that for people? Can you really say that for everybody? That everybody's gonna reach that line? If you're
To
calling
be a
it if you're
musician?
calling it a line, that means it's a fixed
Yeah, I
stretch,
am
right?
fixing it a little bit.
People are not equal.
Fair, but like
Nobody can
it's
reach
a
that stretch.
abstract line. Like you have to express something.
What if, like, I know somebody who's been playing for like years and he's really good at his instrument. He's one of the top, but he cannot express himself on an instrument. What are you going to call him then? What are you going to say to him then? He's not passed the technically. Then, according to your standard, he hasn't passed
He
the
hasn't
line.
passed the line.
Then what's happening there? If you tell him these are my chords, I want you to play all these I want to play these crazy things. I want to play a solo, and he'll do it because he can do it, and it's easy for him to do it. But he can't express himself
Have you actually encountered anyone like
all the time. All the
like
time.
who are really good with their
Yeah,
instrument,
many
but
times.
they're not really good with expression of music?
Or they're not
So many times.
interested at all. They could not be bothered, you know, they're just in a totally different space. But they would put so many of us to shame. It's crazy.
Instrumentally.
Anythingly. Instrumentally, I've got a collection of songs. I've never published them. It's just I've got my own little life going on. I did this. I worked with the Shipping Corporation of India, and so on and so forth, and stuff like that. Oh, I can sing opera. And the guy knows the lyrics to, God knows, you know, how many different Spanish and Italian operas, kind of thing, rattling them off like that. So many of these people who could put a lot of people to shame.
I would term that person more of an instrumentalist, I guess.
Is that not a musician itself?
No.
I don't know what you're talking about. He was a master instrumentalist. I don't know what you're talking about.
So instrumentalist, you've seen those big music machine things would revolve around. Have you seen the marble machine on YouTube?
Yeah.
Have you?
The one where he rotates a crank and like
Yeah.
things fall and they make them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that thing is playing music. So an instrumentalist who can play an instrument really well, but doesn't have an expression. To me, I think that's just the same as the marble machine. Would you differ?
I can stick my head into the exhaust pipe of a ship, and you know the engine would sound fantastic. You know, at a given point in time, you know, I think by the second time you've heard the Marble Machine, from my own experience, maybe by the third or fourth, it does begin to get a little annoying. Which is why I think you've also brought it up, right? In the sense that there is a certain.
I don't know anybody who would listen to it more than maybe once or twice.
And there was a little boy.
So I'll rephrase my question, and maybe it'll be better for you that way. I'm a law student. So we are taught there are two kinds of laws. There is substantial laws and there are procedural laws. And then I went to court and I can see that everybody can learn the procedure really well. That's fine. Everybody can read it, everybody can learn it. But to really be good at substantial law, that's hard. So I'm going for that relation. So an instrumentalist is really good with the procedure of it. But a musician, you need to know the substance of it.
What's beyond a musician?
What's beyond a musician? I don't know. The bigger subset would probably be an artist.
So I think that if we started looking at all of those, as to, if you say at the kernel of it, let's say, would be an instrumentalist, or whatever, and then outside that, a musician or a multi-instrumentalist, if you will, because that exists as well, and then an artist, and then a theorist, and then a philosopher. Because that's the way our degrees are also planned out, right? You go to prep school and so on and so forth, and then you go to college, and then you do a bachelor's program, you do a master's, and then you do a PhD, which is a philosophy degree. So the thing is that if you're a philosopher, and then you study the philosophy of a subject, you've reached that level of, or some level at least of, some sense of attainment kind of thing. But I think there's more to music than instrumentalists and musicians. I think that some listeners make very good musicians.
Without being able to play anything.
Yeah. I would actually stand by that. I think there are a lot of listeners who I would consider and respect for their musicality, for being extremely artistic in their analysis of and the reception of music.
You're talking about some friends or someone you can read about online? Just
I don't know, but I don't read stuff online, man.
But then can you
I
elaborate
would
on
say
that?
both.
Both.
I would actually, on this point, I would actually give you a better understanding of this. Basically, we live in India, right? Where when you talk to an average person and you talk to him about listening to music, then what you see is that what he understands or perceives, it's way below average. If you go to any of the so-called first world countries, the average listener itself is very intelligent, and they can appreciate, like he says, the many layers or depths of a musical piece. That immediately has made him a more musical listener. He or she may not know how to play an instrument, but they may be able to say, oh, there are those synthesizers, that bass line and those violins playing that make up the back of the music, whatever. And this is actually, the number of people who can do this is higher in other countries. We are just exposed to it being a lower number here because that's what it is here.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely.
No, the one of the things that I would credit the let's say the first world with is this sense of organization, right? And there is at times there is a need for it. Bees aren't great at what they do for no reason, and the same goes for ants, right? You might want to ask the tigers why they're going extinct. Okay, they hang around alone. They don't work. No, I'm serious. They don't work well in groups, right? So there are lots of lessons to be drawn from things like this, no? So the West is really good at ordering things, organizing them, and then passing it back to you in a language that is really, really friendly. It's so friendly that all of us here in India understand English. It's really friendly. It's very easy. You know,
Yeah.
you could go anywhere, and you could potentially get by. You know, by speaking English. China is very resistant to English, but they'll still allow you. You know, the only place that might not is France because they don't want to, but they still understand it because they've organized it in this particular fashion, right? I think it becomes certain aspects of it become very accessible. I think that's what it is, but that means that if someone were to want to learn about it, they can get right into the heart of what Jerry Garcia did day one to day X, right? It's going to be difficult for us to find out how many shows Pandit Ravi Shankar played in India. It's you know, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to fix an appointment with his wife. She may have the records. She'll blame someone else. Someone else will blame someone else. There'll be an old Gupta ji who didn't do something. You know, some other guy sold a diary to someone else. God knows what the shit, right? And it's just, this problem is not unique to India. It exists in a lot of other places as well. You know, this lack of record keeping organization kind of thing. But it builds for someone who receives you. You have to. What is music, right? You know, if you're saying that it's sound, no, then it's also received, right? So you've got to then take into account the listener into the world of music. We can't always be talking about it from the point of view of us who make it. You know, there's also us who listen to it, them who listen to it, them who listen to us. So those are they're very important aspects of the world of music, and I think that, you know, we might need to account for them as well in this discussion.
To round back up to the previous answer you gave, I don't know, a little long back. Do you remember anyone per se or a conversation which make you felt like this person, the way he reviews music is so great that he is a musician?
You know, I had there are 2 or 3 of those instances, but I'll tell you one which was an extremely humbling experience for me. I was fairly young, and I had been recruited to play with a fairly senior bunch of musicians, very respected bunch of musicians, and it was a one-off gig, and it was a reunion gig and things like that. And you know, my musical, let's say, knowledge of Western music, whatever, does, at least in my opinion, run deep. And I was wearing my attitude on my shoulder at that point. I've heard it all. You know, I've heard loads and loads of classical music. I've heard jazz and blues and this, that, and the other. And here I was. I'd been called to play with the old guys, so I must be good because I'm a cat, right? And you know, I'm playing, and this guy's looking at me, and he's drinking, and every now and then he'd sort of nod his head in disapproval. Sometimes he'd nod his head in approval, and so a bit of a vibe developed. We never spoke, but there was this vibe, and it's one of those guys you'd lock onto and wonder as to what's going on. When you're drumming, you have all the time in the world behind the drum set, right? You just view the world ahead of you. And so I was trying to figure out what this gentleman's what this gentleman was thinking about, what was going on in his mind. And at the end of the show, I was tired. There was an intermission. He tried coming to me during the intermission, but I turned and walked away. I wasn't being rude, but at that time I needed to stay focused with what I was doing. We hadn't rehearsed, so I'd been given the list of songs in the morning. That added to my arrogance, the fact that you can give me a list of songs in the morning and I play them, by the evening without even rehearsing with you guys, etc. But I have a method, so I had to sequester myself, so I could rehearse the songs in my head and stuff like that. After the show was over, there was a lot of, hey, you played well, and I wasn't saying it, but in my head was, I know, and I don't want to speak to you any further, any longer. This guy came and said that, I need to speak to you. And for some reason or the other, I thought, just because of the manner in which he said it, I thought it would be disrespectful for me to say no, because he's older, he was way, way older than I was. But he started off as, do you mind if I give you some feedback on your playing? So I was, yeah, okay, but can we do it a little later? Band, pack up my things, symbols, this, that, this, that. So he said I have to leave. And so then I said, why don't we'll be here tomorrow. I think, no, I gotta go. It's okay, it's all right. And I realized that I made a bit of a mistake. I thought that was it. He gave me one more chance. He said he turned around and said it'll take 2 minutes. I jumped at it. I realized. I jumped at it. Let's sit down. This guy broke down things with regard to how I played, with regard to how other people played. And initially I was like, is this guy a has-been musician? He said I can't play a thing in my life. And he spoke and he spoke and he spoke, and Tanmay, I listened to him for a good 2 hours. I was drinking. I didn't say a word. I just kept listening to him, and I was weeping because this guy knew everything about what we did. He had heard everything that I did. He knew what I did in the 15th bar with my left hand, how I changed a hi-hat pattern in some chorus, how this guy changed a chord, why this guy had played the solo differently. He had heard this guitarist play the same solo 30 years before in the same hotel room or whatever it was, differently, why it was different. The guitar was... I was in the presence of a genius, some sort of genius, that kind of memory, that kind of association. It was, I was humbled, and ever since then, it changed the way I look at whoever it is who's sitting across me. Now, I don't know who you are. You might strip me of everything that I know. And you will do it with humility. That makes it even worse, because you'll credit me through that. At no point will you say you played badly. And it was an unbelievable experience. So for me, that shut the door on a lot of things. I'm not saying it fixed my arrogance or whatever, but it shut the door on a lot of preconceptions that I had. It was a changing experience for me.
Last round of questions. Is there stuff music has helped you learn which is not musical at all? Like for me, it's math.
Good point. Yeah.
Because I had a phobia of math. I hated it
Yeah.
forever since I dragged it through 12th. And I always had that question that why do we learn X? And music made me solve that in my head itself.
Yeah.
So is there stuff that you guys have?
Where to start, man? There's so much. I went to New York once, right? And every street was familiar because of the songs that I heard. Billy Joel, I'm serious, Billy Joel and Paul Simon and stuff like that. And Fifth Avenue, this is what happens over here. Shit, that's the place. Leonard Cohen wrote about this hotel, and so on and so forth, right? American culture, American folk and pop culture from the 60s up to very recently. I switched off post 90s, but from the 60s to the 90s, British, I don't want to say pop culture, those guys are bastards, but I would say the British separation from its academic snobbery, right? Stories, thinking differently, how to approach love, words, language, your rebellion. It defined my rebellion for me. And these are songs I'm talking about. It's not just music. But in addition to that, I don't know. It's taught me a lot, man. And then patience taught me about myself. Of course, math, interest in other subjects. I don't like loads. It teaches you about other people. You play with him, and you get so many insights into him. And then here's the thing: another very humbling experience is that, you walk into a school and you've got this young chap. You're the older person. You already hold a senior position in that school, and of course you're fairly closed to feedback that way. No matter how open-minded I might say I'm at, other people might say that they are, and they are. But I might say that I am, and I'm not, because every once in a while I do get hypocritical. I disconnect from myself. So the situation that you're closed, and but then when you start playing together, you learn so much about the other person, and then you're not playing, but you're working on music together in a very different capacity. And the two of us were co-producing an album. We were working on an album together, and I don't know how much he learned about me, but I got a chance to learn a lot about him, and I would attribute that as well to to the phenomenon that is music. So there's a lot that I've learned from music, a lot. A lot. I mean, I've learned how warm this guy's father's hands are because of music, and like 4 different occasions. A lot, like a lot. I can't begin to. I don't know about him.
I mean, I feel like there's nothing to say. If you are indulging in music, you're automatically reaping the benefits. It's not. That's why they use music for everything, and they try to, because music can. It teaches you things, it says things that no one else can say or do or teach, right? That's one of the reasons we're doing it. That's one of the reasons we're here, 3 of us. It's because music has influenced everything in the life. We decided to act on it and learn everything that we can from it, right? I mean,
heard like a nagging voice in my head, and after some time, like, click, a switch comes on and Lamb of God plays. And the chorus of Laid to Rest is just whap bang in my ear. There are lessons to be learned, man. It's great.
there's so many things. We could give you the very scientific answers of what music teaches you, but that's not fun. The more fun is going through it yourself, experience and be like, beep, damn son, that's changed my life.
Yeah.
Like, oh I didn't know I was capable of doing all this. I didn't know I was capable of thinking this way, understanding things this way.
There's an interesting anecdote that refers to someone we all know, but he's not here with us at this point. I know that music actually unraveled a world for Anant, and it was I saw it happening. We all saw it happening. He saw it happening, and even to this date, he has the option of saying no. It began with the story, because today he can do that and get away with it. But even today he's saying the same thing. It began with the music, but the story just fit itself into this thing, and it's opened up his world for him, and it's unraveled it for him.
Well, it did for you.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when you
it
picked
did
it
for
up,
everyone. It does for everyone.
It takes a while. It takes a while for you to register it that it has had effect, because at first you're just passively taking it in.
At first, if you're learning music, you're learning your instrument, and that's what you're involved in.
Not even learning instrument. If you're just there to not even learn instrument, maybe just sit for classes and appreciate music, as they call it, right? You're just gonna be listening to it and be like, okay, cool, things are happening to me, and later you'll register like, oh shit, all this happened because of that. And it takes time. But if you've been exposed to it for a long time, or the moment you are exposed to it, it changes you.
Yeah.
It changes you, right?
Yeah. When I started learning music, you said something about learning an instrument in the beginning. So I didn't know what an instrument was. I had sound makers. So this thing makes that kind of sound, and this thing makes a sound if you do this and if you do that. And I didn't know how to tune a guitar the first time I came upon one. So I didn't know what chords were, and that you could press more than 2 strings at the same time, or that you shouldn't carry it in a particular way by the strings. But I did nonetheless, And that's when you break rules out of ignorance, right? My approach to instruments really were, what sounds can I make from them? I remember I was listening to Mahler and I think some Vivaldi, and I had this 500 rupee guitar with, you could walk between the strings and the sound holders, that's separate, right? And there were days when I'd want to play whatever those guys were putting out, violin lines and flute lines on that instrument, because I didn't want to. I mean, that was the only instrument I had access to in the privacy of my room. And then there were times when I also wanted to play Van Halen, and I don't know if Dream Theater were around that time, but yeah, that kind of stuff, and Mark Knopfler, and Floyd, and that Bon Jovi and Bryan Adams, and not just play them in terms of be able to play the song and sing it, because I never really enjoyed singing, but it was a question of how can I get my guitar to sound the way that guy's guitar is sounding. Even a band like Wet Wet Wet, they had an obscure song that no one liked, or no one knew, which I really liked. It had a beautiful guitar sound, and the question was how is it that you can manipulate this thing to sound like that? And for me, then that becomes a more important skill than knowing how to play an instrument. Because actually then that's that would be what I think a question of physics and geometry to some extent, because physics is a question of you knowing how attack and shit like that
Sure.
would work.
We'll go with it.
Geometry would be how to, in that sense, but it would be more that, but from an instinctive perspective. Just like a racing driver knows his lines, but he doesn't necessarily know them in terms of measurements. Whereas the engineers know them in terms of, you turn precisely at that point, cut your speed down to that much. Racing drivers know it instinctively, right? So that kind of thing. So to me, that would be a more important skill, the ability to say that, okay, I can touch something and get a pleasing sound out of it. Do something here that's not going to drive you nuts,
I can agree to that point, because I was the opposite of Adhiraj. In fact, I only knew instruments until I met him. In fact, I only knew. So my parents put me in so many classes, and I learned this instrument, that instrument. I could play them. I could play them well, but I didn't really know sound, as he's talking about. Know it. I knew it like an engineer. I know if I play these with my fingers, I'll make a chord on the piano, right? I knew if I play this pattern on my hand on the guitar or on the piano, I'll make a scale. I'll play a scale. I knew that, but I didn't know it instinctively. I didn't know what it was, what the sound was. And then when that came to me, then I realized that, it didn't matter if I knew those instruments or not, if I knew the scales or not, if I knew those patterns or not. It definitely helped me more, but it didn't really matter. At 0%.
Really? Zero?
It's digitally broken up. What I need to know is that if I say beep, that moves. If I say boop, that moves. Whatever, because that's how the brain is functioning. I need to map that to whatever is before me. Sometimes it's this shape, sometimes it's that shape, sometimes it's whatever. These various things. So it's a question of you separate some of this, and that sped up the thing for me. It becomes quite easy when you say that you separate the physical aspect of you, because that's you talking to your body. That's you commanding your body to do what you want your body to do. If you do that, you'll get this result. That's just basic 101,
Neuroscience.
Yeah, it's also physics. Like, if I do that, this book is going to fall. But I have to spark a motion, right, for it. So that's one. If you study that separately from the instrument itself, it makes it very interesting, because then you're not struggling with the C major scale, as well as whether you're dealing with articulation from your knuckle joints vis-a-vis your digital joints, right, and finger placement all at the same time. It's really nice, because then you learn 2 plus 2 here, you learn handwriting in that class, you learn English in this class, and you put them together. It's a much easier presentation. You learn to answer the question by the end of the day, as opposed to do all of them in the same class. It's going to take you days, because by the end of it you're going to hate the teacher anyway. Right? And you're going to stop listening. So you separate it out, it becomes a very different thing. It's a question of, how do I move my body? How do I manipulate the instrument? What is it that I can do? What is it that I can, how far can I push it? What are the boundaries? what are the rules that I need to break? And we've done this even with our album a certain time, and we've broken rules. I mean, it's not necessarily path burning stuff, but we've done some things. You know, we've converted guitars into one string guitar. We've put vague things and chopsticks and lined up on top of each other as bridges. We've retuned bass guitars and done other things to their stringing systems and stuff like that. Where the objective then is to acquire the sound, not to play the instrument the way you are supposed to play it, which is very, very disappointing at times. You know, it's just ridiculous. You'll never learn anything if that's what you do. No. Yeah, I've flung my guitar at my dog, partially to see what happens to the dog, partially to see what happens to the guitar.
Tells you a lot about his character.
There's a lot.
Then carried it in one particular way. I mean, like all these things. I wouldn't recommend the flinging part. And not at your
Please
pet.
not on a dog, yeah.
No, I mean, why not? If the dog's a bastard dog, then why not? There were times when this guy was a bastard. He was a good guy, but there was times when he was a bastard dog.
I'm sure, like most beings, they have their goods and their bads.
Yeah.
So this has been great. I've learned a lot about at least two of you. And what do you think about music? And
when
how
you were getting impatient, the second half of it is when it really opened up, right? It became meaningful. No? You wanted to fuck off. Right? The philosophy of music. But yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was great.
Thanks a lot,
You're
Barun and
welcome.
Adhiraj. Thanks a lot, Saira, for producing.
Saira on sound for us.
Saira on sound for us, and Manish with the camera
Manish, our cameraman.
Manish.
And lights as well.
and the lights as well.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
You can hear them throughout the whole